the white Afrikaans, okay? Targeting the Temple of Solomon, segregation, colonization, genocide, okay? And some of this I've mentioned already, the Native American genocide, Native Australian deprecation, all people of color in here are targeted in global domination. Ultimately, what came out of this was a three-pronged military campaign. The genocide of Native America, the African Muafa, and the Chinese open door policy. Once those three were established, everything else fell in place like falling dominoes, okay? And that's that three-pronged military campaign being sent out into the world. China was the last holdout, but eventually they were broken as well. The corporate structure, Vatican, I mentioned the first official C corporation. They become the pulpit of propaganda. Feudalism becomes capitalism at that point. And nowadays, we're going back to a state of fascism with corporatism. Oh, thank you so much. Thank you. Yes, I just realized I did need it as you're handing it to me. Thank you. So we call it corporatism. It used to be called fascism, but Mussolini is the one who invented both terms in the same paragraph. I have that quote in the book too, because that's a quote most people don't realize. Someone was interviewing Mussolini during his reign of power. And he said, what would you call? Why do you walk around with those two sticks like Emperor Nero did? He says, well, those are fasci, and I call it fascism, what I'm doing. But then he went on, and this is the part of the quote that normally gets stricken out. He says a better term for it would be corporatism. So even back at the time of the 30s and 40s, the term corporatism had already been invented by the dictator who also brought in the term fascism in the same paragraph. So this is not a new term. This is an old term that is coming back, and it's a proper term because fascism is more on the side, if you want to split hairs, the government taking over, but corporatism is when the corporation takes over, okay? And that, the corporate structure we're talking about here, right? You ask any psychologist to analyze a corporation, and they would have no idea, since a corporation wants to be seen as a person, which is amoral and unethical in so many different ways, but they get away with referring to a corporation as a person, which is stupid because at best it's schizophrenia, multiple personality disorder, okay? Multiple entities operating as one. That's the S.T.E.M regime who passed it down into the corporate mentality. So any psychologist will tell you, yeah, it's schizophrenia. That's what a corporation is defined as, because of the deranged mentality that goes through a corporation. One hand doesn't know what the other is doing, right? They act like they do, but they don't. So when you're allowing these corporate entities to take over, this is the S.T.E.M regime on the move, what we see happening today in the current political climate. That has pilfered over into buying off certain elements in Congress. Those, when I say elements, I mean the people who look like me, okay? Those elements being bought off by those corporations to go against their own people, go against their own constituents. Even those constituents are calling them up and saying, moron, we don't want this. They're hanging up on their own constituents and going their own way. That's not going to go so well for them, okay? Because they're siding with something that will drop them like a fly if they become a liability. And that's the thing with the Billionaire Boys Club, as I refer to it in the book, the Good Old Boys Network, okay? When you reach that level of being a billionaire, you get a knock on the door from nondescript entities saying, hey, you have this economic influence now. We're going to have a talk. And you're going to obey us from now on. Otherwise, we're going to rip you to pieces, okay? And so at that point, you get the Billionaire Boys Club who take their marching orders, okay, from this two-party system, the S.T.E.M regime. And the thing is, they've gone to bed with the devil, so to speak. They've sold their soul to the devil for a piece of the action because they don't realize in making their own bed, they sign their own death warrant, because at any point in time, that billionaire boys club is going to have to realize that they're still seen as a lowly human. Okay. And they're going to be betrayed. All those favors they've been promised by betraying other human beings like us in the community, they're going to get betrayed the same way. Only this time, they're going to have to pay a heavy price because of what they went to bed with. And they're not going to be able to escape that. So that form of justice is coming for them. Even though we may not see it on the surface, there is a boatload of stuff happening behind the scenes that is serving the wheels of justice. Okay, the scales of justice. And if you put your faith in that, if you're going to put faith in anything at all, is that the universe always balances the equation. I often talk about in my lectures in the book how you can't get away from it. The mafia used to refer to it as the ledger books. There'd be one legitimate one and one they cooked that the IRS wasn't allowed to see. Okay. Well, those two ledger books represent the scale of justice, and your heart being weighed against the feather when Anubis is waiting for you at the gates of Hades. Okay. Same idea. So I often refer to that balancing the equation as the ledger books held by Anubis, Charon, Neptune, and Pluto. Okay. You could almost see them as a law firm. All right. And you may think you're getting away with something, and it may be the most evil thing ever. And you may think, well, what form of justice? Don't worry. The ledger books will catch up with them. They will be balanced out. And Anubis, Pluto, Neptune, and Charon, they will catch up with you in the worst way. And then you'll be sorry. So, because Mother Earth doesn't mess around. And she's the one that knows how to play poker with a straight face, and you'll never see it coming. The Orion Empire and the Chetu regime, they think they have the upper hand. Well, Mother Earth has another surprise waiting for them in terms of what's happening with the evolution of official first contact and the benevolent factions who came back for the good fight. The idea of locking down the Egyptian university system, the Vatican saying it was forbidden. We often look at Galileo's rebellion, okay, when he created the original Illuminati, which just meant the enlightened ones, enlightened minds. These were not the bad guys at the time. These were the good guys, okay? But he got his inspiration from his predecessor, Copernicus. Little known aspect of history, Copernicus said, screw it, I'm taking my entire school of thought, my students, to Egypt. We're going to go find out what we're forbidden to see. And this is what boosted Copernicus's knowledge by leaps and bounds. That part you never learn about. And this is the part that got him in hot water. It wasn't what he talked about. It's where he got the knowledge from, because when he came back to Europe, they found out where he was. And this led to the hit mob going out and trying to get him and trying to castrate him and vilify him. Okay. Ultimately, that ended up turning Copernicus into a martyr, so to speak. But Copernicus was the inspiration for Galileo. And when you realize that part of history, that Copernicus did go to Egypt, even though it was forbidden, then that puts the pieces into place as to why Galileo did what he did. He saw what the church was doing. He and many other gifted individuals, mathematicians, scientists, writers, thinkers, okay? So he banded together with them in secret in Rome's backyard, because what's the best place to hide? Right under the nose of your enemy, okay, where they're not going to find you. And he started having these meetings with them because they didn't like what the church was putting out there. And Galileo, I think he realized where all that propaganda was coming from behind the scenes with the Chetu regime. And they realized this is not good. What they're putting out there is pure garbage. There's no truth to it. They came together as the illuminated ones, Illuminati, intellectuals who simply knew better, to preserve the exploration of truth. They were reacting to the church's falsehood and the Gestapo propaganda being put out there because the church was being used as a shell corporation. This ultimately results in Galileo's house arrest. They couldn't afford to turn him into another Copernicus. So they're like, well, what are you going to do with him? You know, we botched up the agenda against Copernicus. We can't repeat that again. All right, we'll put him under house arrest. He's not allowed to talk to anybody, even though he was able to secretly find a way of passing messages in and out of his house. The point is, it ruined the ability for the Illuminati to actually meet proactively in secret and have conversations with each other. This put out the All Points Bulletin to go after these other members. Supposedly, someone got caught in a dark alley who was drunk. Turns out to be one of those people who met with Galileo. Supposedly, he had a list of names on him. This is what sent off the bells and whistles as to who the members of the Illuminati were. And so they became hunted like animals. Okay? The Catholic Church labeled them as heretics, shaitanists. So here's where we get another word from. It's an Arabic term, shaitan, for outcast, despot, someone who doesn't get along with others, or someone who's canceled out, as we might say, cancel culture. Okay? Shaitan becomes mispronounced as Satan. Shaitanist becomes Satanist. So this is where that word comes from. It has nothing to do with some supernatural prince of darkness. It has to do with being politically labeled as an enemy of the people. That's all it has to do with. Ironically enough, the word Satan is the only word that has two different sources that collide together. We talked about one here, the political motive, right? The other one is what trickled down to earth through mispronunciation. Remember how it said earlier, the queens were the Sata queens? Well, over time, that becomes mispronounced as Satan or Satan. So you have two sources going to the same word, the same mispronunciation, coming from two different meanings. And this is how the two combine together to create that propaganda about a supernatural evil, when in fact, it was coming from a political evil and also an economic evil, corporate greed from the reptilian queens. Yeah, there's an evil there, but it's not ooga booga evil, okay? It's real tangible evil, something that can be sent to jail, all right? The Illuminati falls prey to the church labelism propaganda. This is important to know in any aspect of society. If you label someone long enough, that brainwashing sets in, and then you start acting like what you were labeled. The Illuminati were labeled as animals. So eventually what do they do? Out of desperation, they start acting like animals. They start taking on other members to increase their numbers because they were going to go back at the church. Well, it wasn't a genuine Illuminati that Galileo started. They were taking on every degenerate under the sun they could to increase their numbers. This is how the Illuminati becomes a bastardized element. They also became masters of infiltration. But the labelism is what produced that social deviance on purpose by the church via the Chetu regime, because they knew that constant labelism would work to their favor, and the Illuminati fell prey to it. They walked right into it and became the abortion that they were being labeled as. It becomes its own abomination. They become master infiltrators. They find safe haven within Freemasonry, and then they begin infiltrating all the way up to the level of 33rd degree Masons. And then they become the head of all Freemasonry. So something to think about there in terms of who's taking orders from who. Then we get into what I started bringing up before, the dirty colonists, the rebellion